In the heart of a divided galaxy, a powerful alien princess locks eyes with a mysterious human envoy, and time stops. She's never forgotten the boy who once pulled her from the flames, and now he stands before her, alive. But this is more than a reunion. Whispers of betrayal echo through the halls of power, and together they must uncover a hidden plot before it tears their world apart. This isn't just a story of fate. It's a fight for the future of the stars. If you are new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Let's move toward wonderful story. The crystal lights of the Nithera dome shimmered like stars trapped under glass. Delegates from across the galaxy filled the vast chamber, each one wrapped in robes of their homeworld, speaking in hushed tones, exchanging glances, debating futures. At the center of it all stood Princess Solon, poised and calm, though her heart beat with a quiet storm. She was young for her role, but no one questioned her wisdom or the strength in her gaze. Years of leadership had taught her to read between smiles and silence, but nothing had prepared her for the moment when her eyes fell upon a figure across the hall. He was human. That alone was enough to stop her breath. Humans rarely attended the galactic circle, and never without heavy protocol. But this man stood, confidently, surrounded by a few neutral delegates. His clothes were simple but well-fitted, his posture relaxed, his dark hair falling just over his brow. He laughed gently at something one of the traders said, unaware that someone was staring at him from across the room. Staring not just in surprise, but in recognition. Solon's fingers tightened around the stem of her crystal glass. A memory broke free inside her like a dam that had held too long. Fire, smoke, screams. She had been just a child, barely old enough to understand the war tearing her world apart. On that terrible day, she had become separated from her family, hiding behind shattered walls as buildings fell around her. Her royal guards were gone, her home was in ruins, and the air burned her lungs. She remembered crying, afraid and alone, when out of the smoke stepped a boy. Not from her planet. Human. His face covered in ash, his voice trembling but calm. He reached for her hand without hesitation and pulled her from the rubble. Together they ran, through collapsing corridors, through the heat and confusion, until he found a small cave where she could hide. He whispered words she didn't understand, gave her his jacket, and promised to come back. But he never did. She was rescued later by her people. They told her it was a miracle she survived. The boy was never found. For years, Solon had wondered if he was real or just something her mind had created in the chaos. She had clung to the memory as a symbol of hope, of kindness in the darkest hour. Now that face, the one buried in her dreams, was standing 100 feet away. Solon's breath returned in a sharp gasp. The sounds of the council faded. She set her glass on a nearby ledge and stepped away from her advisors, her long royal robe trailing behind her. Her steps were careful at first, but soon turned deliberate. She moved through the hall with grace. Ignoring the curious glances, her eyes locked on the man whose presence had brought her past roaring into the present. As she got closer, he turned. Perhaps he felt her gaze or heard her steps. Their eyes met, and in that instant, time stopped. Recognition flashed across his face. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He just stared wide-eyed as if trying to decide whether the woman before him was real. The moment stretched between them. Then he spoke, softly, just above a whisper. "You're the girl from the fire." Solon felt tears sting the corners of her eyes. She hadn't cried in years. "And you're the boy who saved me," she said, her voice steady but thick with emotion. "I never knew your name." He stepped closer, the distance between them now just inches. "Kieran," he said. "My name is Kieran." She nodded, the word anchoring itself in her heart. "I'm Solon, princess now, but I was just a scared girl back then." He gave a small nod, his expression unreadable. "I remember everything. Solon, searched his face, the features grown from the boy she had known. "Why didn't you come back?" "I waited. I searched." "I was taken," he said quietly, "by a group of nomads. They thought I was a lost orphan. I never knew where you were taken. I didn't even know if you survived." Her hands trembled as she reached out and touched his wrist. The contact was gentle, filled with memories and questions. "I survived because of you." They stood in silence for a moment, the noise of the council resuming around them like a distant storm. Kieran looked around at the grand hall, at the lights and tapestries. "This place, it's beautiful. It suits you." Solon gave a small smile. "It hasn't always felt like home, especially after the invasion." "I'm sorry," he said, "for what happened to your world. You gave me hope when everything else was burning." She replied, her voice soft. He nodded, his gaze never leaving hers. "I never stopped thinking about you." For a moment, Solon forgot about the circle, the politics, the fragile alliances hanging by threads. She only saw the boy who had pulled her from the fire, now grown into a man who had returned without knowing why. "I want to know everything," she said. "Where you've been, what you've seen. And I want to know what you've become," he said. "You're not the girl I remember. You're something more." They didn't need to say anything else. The stars had crossed once before, and now fate had brought them back together. The story they began as children had returned for a new chapter. Neither of them knew what came next, but in that moment they understood one thing. They were no longer strangers in the galaxy. They were the beginning of something that would change everything. Solon led Kieran through the quiet corridors of the palace, her heart still racing from their unexpected reunion. The hallways were lit with soft blue light, and each step echoed gently against the polished stone. Behind them, the voices of the galactic circle faded, but the weight of the moment pressed heavily between them. Neither spoke at first. There was too much to say, and neither knew where to begin. Kieran walked beside her, taking in the beauty of the palace with quiet curiosity, his expression calm but alert. He didn't seem overwhelmed by the grandeur or the powerful figures gathered within. Instead, he moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had been through far greater storms. They reached a small chamber hidden behind a curtain of flowing fabric. Solon pushed it aside and gestured for him to enter. The room was peaceful, with cushions placed near a large window that overlooked the glowing cliffs of Nuthera. Twin moons cast a silver light across the floor. Solon sat and invited him to join her. Kieran lowered himself onto the cushions with a sigh, his eyes drifting toward the moons outside. "I still can't believe you're here," Solon said softly, watching his face. "I didn't plan to be," he replied. "Not exactly. I've been traveling between systems for years, helping where I can, mostly as a negotiator, someone who speaks when others can't or won't. When I heard about the circle, I thought maybe I could offer something useful." "You've done more than that," she said. "You've given me something I thought I lost long ago." Kieran looked at her with a seriousness that felt both familiar and new. "I never forgot you, Solon, even when I didn't know if you were still alive." She nodded, her voice catching. "I remembered every detail, the sound of your voice, the way you led me through the rubble. I don't even think I thanked you properly." "You were a child," he said gently, "and I was barely older. But you saved me," she said. "That matters." They fell into silence again, a silence not awkward but full of shared memory. The years between them seemed to melt away, leaving only the bond that had started in the middle of a nightmare. Solon studied his face, the way he watched the moons, the way his hands rested calmly on his knees. He carried himself like someone who had seen much but not let it harden him. She felt safe with him, and she didn't know why that mattered so much right now. "What happened after you left me?" she asked. "After you hid me?" "I was lost," he said. "I tried to go back, but the path was gone, fire and smoke everywhere. I wandered until a group of traders found me. They took me in, fed me, gave me a name, even though I already had one. I stayed with them for a few years, then moved on. learned how to listen, how to survive. Were you ever afraid? She asked. He smiled faintly. Yes, but fear isn't always the enemy. Sometimes it keeps you sharp. Sometimes it reminds you of what matters. Solon nodded slowly, absorbing his words. The council is more fragile than it appears, she admitted. There are tensions rising, especially between the core systems and the outer colonies. It's getting harder to hold them together. That's why I came, Kieran said. To help. Even if I didn't know I'd find you again. Maybe that's why the stars brought you here, she said. He looked at her, and for a long moment, neither of them said anything. There was understanding in their silence, a shared feeling that words couldn't explain. They had both changed, grown, seen different parts of the galaxy. But in this quiet moment, their paths felt as if they had always been leading here. A soft chime rang from outside the room. Solon's advisor, Merrick, appeared at the curtain, his face troubled. Apologies, Princess, he said with a respectful bow. There's been a new dispute among the colony delegates. They refuse to attend the next session unless certain conditions are met. Solon rose, her expression shifting into the calm determination she wore in public. I'll be there shortly, she said. Merrick nodded and left without another word. She turned back to Kieran. This is what my life looks like now. Conflict, diplomacy, constant pressure to hold everything together. I can help, he said simply. I've seen negotiations fall apart for less. But I've also seen how honesty and patience can rebuild trust. She smiled, grateful. Then come with me, not just to the meeting. Stay. Be part of this. Help me find a way to bring them together. He nodded without hesitation. Whatever you need. As they walked side by side toward the meeting chambers, Solon felt something shift inside her. She was no longer walking alone. Kieran had returned, not just from her past but into her future. The galaxy might be filled with chaos and politics, but for the first time in a long while she believed peace was possible, not just between worlds, but within herself. Their bond, forged in fire, had survived years in space. Now it had returned, to give both of them purpose once more, and this time they would face the unknown together. The council chamber of Nythera was tense. Delegates spoke in clipped tones, voices rising and falling like waves against stone. Princess Solon sat at the head of the circular room, her expression calm, but her thoughts raced. For weeks, the galactic circle had grown more unstable. Talks of unity were often met with silence or sharp words. Rumors of a secret alliance brewing beneath the surface of diplomacy had begun to spread. She needed help, and that's why Kieran now stood beside her. No longer just a face from her past, but a trusted ally with insight into how to handle dangerous conversations. Kieran had spent years traveling the galaxy. He'd seen peaceful worlds collapse into war and bitter enemies become partners. He understood that the true power of diplomacy wasn't in strong words but in quiet listening. Still, even he could feel the shift in the room. Trust was crumbling, and fear was beginning to shape decisions. A delegate from the outer colonies, a woman named Mira, stood and crossed her arms. We've listened to promises for years, she said, but we're still being ignored. Our planets receive fewer resources, less protection, and no voice in major decisions. If nothing changes, we will consider leaving the circle entirely. Whispers followed her statement, spreading through the chamber like fire. Solon sat straighter, her voice calm. No one wants that, Mira. The strength of the circle lies in our unity. Mira's eyes met Solon's and then shifted to Kieran. And now we're supposed to believe that a human stranger, someone who hasn't lived our struggle, can fix what we've been suffering for decades. Kieran stepped forward, not defensive, but steady. I don't have all the answers, he said, but I've seen what happens when people stop listening. The first step to any solution is understanding, not just through speeches, but real, honest conversation. That's why I'm here. Some nodded, others scoffed. The room was split, just like the council itself. Solon knew they were on the edge of something fragile. A single spark could either start a fire or light the way forward. Later that day, in one of the quiet wings of the palace, Solon met with her closest advisor, Merrick. His face was drawn, his tone urgent. "Something is wrong, Princess. The usual disagreements are growing sharper. We've intercepted partial messages, encrypted communications between certain delegates from the core systems. They hint at forming a separate coalition outside the circle." Solon's stomach sank. "Do we know who's involved?" "Not yet, but there's a pattern. Delegates who've started backing out of negotiations. They're all connected. We may be looking at the formation of a shadow alliance, one that could destroy everything we've worked for." She turned to Kieran, who had been listening in silence. "If this is true," she said, "we have to find proof. We can't confront them without it." Kieran nodded. "Let me go in. They don't know who I am, not really. I can pose as an independent broker, someone who trades in secrets. They'll let me close if they think I have something to offer." Merrick raised a brow. "It's dangerous. If they discover your true purpose, I understand," Kieran said, "but this is worth the risk." That evening, dressed in the worn, neutral clothes of a trade envoy, Kieran made his way to an informal gathering hosted outside the council's official halls. The setting was elegant, but the tone was different, less formal, more secretive. Delegates stood in small groups, speaking in low voices. Kieran kept his posture relaxed, his expression calm. He moved from one circle to the next, listening more than he spoke. It didn't take long before he caught fragments of conversation that confirmed their fears. Phrases like reclaiming power and no longer waiting for consensus made it clear that something was unfolding behind the scenes. One man, tall and dressed in silver robes, seemed to hold the attention of others. His voice was smooth but firm. "The circle has become weak. If we do not act, our influence will vanish. This is our time to lead." Kieran's heart pounded. He had to get this information back to Solon. But just as he turned to leave, a hand clamped down on his shoulder. He turned slowly, keeping his face neutral. The man looking at him was not smiling. "You've been listening very closely," the man said. "I listen for a living," Kieran replied. "That's how I make deals worth anything." The man studied him for a moment longer, then slowly released his grip. "Be careful who you listen to, broker. Some words can be dangerous." Kieran nodded and walked away, careful not to move too quickly. He didn't breathe freely until he was outside the chamber and moving down a dark corridor toward the palace. When he finally reached Solon, she was waiting in her private quarters, worry clear on her face. "You're back," she said quickly. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," he said. "But you were right. The alliance exists. They're planning to break away from the circle, and possibly more." Solon's eyes narrowed. "Did you hear names?" "Not yet, but I got close. If we act now, we can expose them." She took his hand, her fingers tightening. "We'll do this together." The room was quiet as they stood there, the weight of responsibility heavy on their shoulders. But in each other's presence there was strength. They had come through fire once before. Now they would walk into the shadows and bring the truth into the light. The sun had not yet risen over Nuthera when Princess Solon stood at the edge of the balcony outside her chambers. The sky was deep purple, dotted with the final stars of the night. Below her the palace was quiet, but tension lay thick in the air. The truth about the Shadow Alliance that threatened the galactic circle was now in her hands, thanks to Kieran's courage. She knew what had to be done, but the path forward would not be easy. Exposing powerful leaders came with great risk. One wrong step, and the fragile peace they had tried to build could collapse. Kieran stood beside her, silent but steady. He had faced danger to uncover the truth, pretending to be someone he wasn't, walking among enemies who would have destroyed him had they known his purpose. Now he was ready to face whatever came next. Solon turned to him, her voice quiet. "If we speak out, some of them will try to deny it. They'll twist the story, try to make us the villains. Kieran nodded. Let them. What matters is that we speak with honesty, that we give others the chance to choose what's right. When the council gathered later that morning, the chamber was full. Every seat was taken, every pair of eyes focused on Solène. Whispers had already begun, talk of rumors, betrayal, strange meetings. The atmosphere was one of suspicion and fear. Solène stepped forward, her robe flowing behind her, and raised her voice so all could hear. For too long, she began, we've hidden behind formal words and polite silence. But silence can no longer protect us. She paused, letting the quiet settle. Then she continued. A group among us has conspired to break the unity of the circle. Their goal is not peace or progress, but power. They have met in secret. They have spoken of dissolving this alliance and taking control. Gasps filled the air. Murmurs rose, some in shock, others in protest. Councillor Vale, one of the elder delegates from the core systems, stood. These are serious accusations, Princess. Where is your proof? Solène turned to Kieran. He stepped forward, holding a small device. This contains recordings from recent meetings held outside the council's authority, he said. You will hear their words in their own voices. You will hear their plans to take control. He pressed a button, and the chamber filled with the voices of the conspirators, clear, undeniable, and damning. As the recordings played, faces turned pale. Some delegates hung their heads in shame. Others looked angry, caught off guard by how far the betrayal had gone. Councillor Vale did not speak again. When the final recording ended, the chamber was silent. Solène looked around at them all. We can no longer pretend that everything is fine, but this moment is not the end of the circle. It is a test of what we truly stand for. One by one, delegates began to speak. Some offered apologies. Others called for the conspirators to be removed from their posts. A few walked out in protest. But most stayed. Most understood that the truth had been shown, and it could not be ignored. That night, back in her private chambers, Solène sat with Kieran by the window, watching the twin moons rise over the cliffs. The hardest part was over, but many challenges remained. Trust would take time to rebuild. The circle would need stronger foundations than ever before. Solène looked at Kieran, her heart full of both gratitude and something deeper, something that had grown between them in the quiet moments and dangerous missions. You didn't have to do any of this, she said. You could have walked away. He smiled gently. Maybe, but I didn't want to. I came here to help, and I found more than just a mission. I found you again. She reached for his hand, and I'm glad you did. In the days that followed, reforms began. New systems of accountability were put in place. The colonies were given a stronger voice. Delegates who had lost trust were replaced with new leaders, chosen not for power, but for fairness. It was the beginning of something better. Kieran didn't stay in the shadows anymore. He stood beside Solène in meetings, helped guide the conversations, and spoke with the quiet wisdom he had learned across the stars. His presence brought calm. His past gave him insight, and his bond with Solène gave them both strength. One morning, as the suns rose side by side, Solène walked with Kieran through the gardens of the palace. We've changed something, she said softly. Not just policies or laws, but hearts. The circle feels different now. Kieran nodded. Because we told the truth, and because we didn't face it alone. They stopped near a fountain, where the water shimmered in the early light. For a moment they stood in silence, breathing in the peace they had fought for. I've been many places, Kieran said. But I think this is the first time I've felt like I'm where I belong. Solène smiled. Then stay, not just as an advisor, but as a part of this future. He took her hand, his grip warm and certain. I already have. As the stars faded into the morning sky, the promise of a new era settled over Nuthera. It had been built not through war or force, but through trust, courage, and two people who had once met in the middle of fire. Now, side by side, they faced a future full of hope, and together they would write the next chapter of peace among the stars.